So what's up, people? This is Robert Bassano. I want to come to you guys today and present this little 12.5 minute or so presentation by Mr. Don Pettit. I know you guys, some of you may remember him. I did a nice little video on some of that bullshit that he was telling everyone at another conference regarding how fast the earth moved and how quickly the camera needed to be prepared, how much time you had to take a photo because the ISS was moving 17,000 miles an hour and you had maybe 3 or 5 seconds to take a good shot. How about that shit, right? So Don Pettit, man, I give it to him, man. I think they're getting ready to use him to disclose the truth of what the fuck's really going on with NASA. And here's what I think is going on, is that they're going to admit there's no fucking people up there. Never been any fucking people up there. And he's going to tell you why. He's still a fucking idiot, but he's going to tell you why. So I want you to listen to this and develop your own opinion. But we're going to critique it a little bit. It's 12 minutes, 16 seconds. I want you to listen to what he says, okay? Stand by.
Tyranny of the rocket equation. What is the tyranny? If you have a rocket, its design hinges on a momentum balance that we call the rocket equation. And the rocket equation involves the magnitude of the gravity field that you are navigating in, which basically says where do you want to go. And you have to have propellant, right? Because you got a rocket. And the propellant gets its energy from chemical bonds. So these two things that human beings have almost zero control over, the magnitude of gravity and the energy of chemical bonds, constitutes what I call the tyranny of the rocket equation, because it holds a strong grip on how we can make our rockets. Now, notice, I have the latest hipster computer-generated fonts. These fonts are crafted so skillfully on the computer, they mimic handwritten slides. Okay, so you have a rocket. You can see my little picture of a rocket. There's two things that are really, really important about the rocket. One, the rocket velocity. This is how fast your rocket is going to go. And then the exhaust velocity. That's how fast your propellant is going to squirt out the nozzle. And these two things, these two velocities, are inputs into this rocket equation, which is the momentum balance. And you turn the crank, and out from the rocket equation comes the mass percent of your rocket that has to be propellant. You can't deviate from that or your rocket won't get to where it's supposed to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to independently look at the rocket velocity, then we're going to independently look at the exhaust velocity. We'll plug them into the rocket equation and calculate what the mass percent of your rocket has to be. So where do you want to go? Well, we're going to start on Earth, so you are here, right? And I think we are all here, except for a few of the presenters that presented earlier today. They're already in space. But we are here. And you want to go someplace out there. Well, where is out there? There's orbit. There's the moon. There's Mars. There are places between the Earth and the moon. We call it the Earth-Moon space. And there's Lagrange points. There can be asteroids. There can be geostationary orbit. So pick where you want to go. Do your physics for navigating in that gravity field, and out comes your rocket velocity that you have to obtain or you won't get there. And I put some of those on there. To go from Earth to Earth orbit takes 8 kilometers per second. That's around 17,500 miles an hour. So you really got to go fast. Now, to get to moon takes 14. to get to Mars takes 16. So just think about this. Going from Earth surface to Earth orbit takes half, sometimes more than half of the velocity required to go anywhere else you may want to go. So perhaps the giant leap for mankind was not the first step on the moon, but going from the surface of Earth into Earth orbit.
Now I want you guys to understand what he just said. He said the constant velocity to reach Earth orbit is 8 kilometers a second. All right. Near asteroid 12 kilometers a second. The moon 14 kilometers a second. Okay. 14 kilometers a second. That's nearly 1/4. Okay. Further. You have to be traveling almost twice as fast to get to the moon, which NASA claims is 258 fucking thousand miles from the surface of the Earth. 258,000 miles, not feet. 258,000 miles. Now, for those who've heard my previous video about where the sun and moon may be, I'm not saying it's definitely there, but based on surface temperatures and other scientific observations and laser range finding that's been conducted by the European Space Observatory, let's go with these numbers. 14 kilometers a second. Now think about how much propellant you would need to get to that fucking velocity. Now, there are going to be people out there who you think you're a rocket engineer, rocket scientist, whatever your specialty or education may be. I'm neither. But I can tell you this here right now. If you're going to tell me that the Saturn V rockets that were used for the moon had enough propellant in them to get to 14 kilometers a second because they went around in a few orbits to slingshot away from to break the Earth's gravitational pull, and they somehow accelerated to 14 kilometers a second, I'm going to say, prove it. Prove to me in documentation. Show me the mathematics on how many orbits that needed to take place to get the Saturn V rocket to accelerate to 14 kilometers a second to get to the moon. And then get back. And then fucking get back. Right? Because I'm going to tell you here right now, there ain't no fucking way they could get to 14 kilometers a second and get out 258,000 miles and then suddenly all the fucking second lose their fucking momentum and slow the fuck down so they can land on the fucking moon. Because the moon ain't fucking 258,000 miles. It's 528,000 fucking feet from the surface of the Earth. So let's stick with the 8 kilometers a second, which we know is attainable. There ain't no fucking way anybody gonna ever get to Mars traveling twice the fucking speed, because chemical rockets, propellant, can't function in the environment they claim is microgravity or the vacuum of fucking space. And that's where Mars is supposed to be, right? In the free space vacuum, out there in this superfluid helium, no viscosity, doing the same thing the fucking sun, moon, and Earth is supposed to be doing. Just dancing around, doing its thing. Which means that there's a possibility fucking Mars is not as far as they say it is. Okay? So, looking at these numbers is what he's talking about here. And based on this rocket science, listen to what else he has to say. Because I don't need to debunk him. He fucking debunks himself.
Now, let's look at our choice for propellants. And this defines the exhaust velocity because the energy in the propellant comes from the chemical bonds and it goes squirting out the nozzle, so you got the velocity. And I've chosen a class of around 4 different kinds of propellants, ranging from solid rocket to kerosene, oxygen, hypergols. Hypergols. If you oxidize, you mix them together, they spontaneously combust. I had a friend of mine who he would always describe his latest relationship with his girlfriend as hypergolic. And then we have good old hydrogen oxygen, which turns out to be one of the more energetic chemical reactions we could use. And these are all chosen from real rockets, and we can take real payload and real human beings into orbit right now. And there's the exhaust velocities. Read it and weep, because that's all you can get right now from chemistry. So let's take those now. Let's go from the surface of Earth into low Earth orbit, 8 kilometers per second. We're going to choose a variety of rocket propellants, plug them into the rocket equation. All the chalk dust is going to fall, and here is the result. Okay, look at that. Mass percent propellant. They're all around 90%. That means your rocket's sitting on a launch pad, 90% of it is propellant, and 10% of it is everything you think of as the rocket. And that's dictated by this tyrannical equation called the rocket equation. Now, this is a pretty simplistic approach. It's almost a naive approach, something that you do as a freshman in physics class. But real rocket scientists, or really, I should say, rocket engineers, sharpen their pencils and let's see what real rockets can do. And there's the Saturn V, the Space Shuttle, and Soyuz.
Now, I want to make a good point here. He shows how much mass percent propellant you need just to get to Earth orbit, low Earth orbit, at 8 kilometers a second. The highest percentage, solid rocket fuel, 96%. 83% of hydrogen, 93% of hypergols, which is how he explains is that when you put 2 substances together, they automatically fucking explode. Kerosene O2, 94%. So if you need that much, and you're not carrying a payload at all, and you just need to get the low Earth orbit, 8 kilometers a second velocity, what happens when you fucking get there, right? So, if you need to go to the moon, right, that means you got to travel further and faster. Further and faster. Which means you got your solid rocket fuel that's probably going to be around 98, 99%. 96, 97% kerosene O2. Probably 95, 97% hypergols. Hydrogen, definitely going to be around 90, 93, 95%. So that leaves 5% of the rest of what you're carrying that you need to put up into space above 328,000 feet. That's a pretty fucking small vehicle. It can't be the same fucking space shuttle that you're launching up there when you got to go to the moon. Oh, that's right. The space shuttle never went to the moon. Let's just say the Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V rocket, they're saying 85% just to go to the moon. Because what were they inside of? They were inside this little capsule, jammed up in there just like they were in the Soyuz. So it had to be a light vehicle. It had to be a smaller vehicle just to get to the moon. So the further you want to go and the faster you want to go, remember that. The further you want to go in the space and the faster you need to go to get up there, the lighter the fucking payload. You can't get up there with a heavy payload. So what does that tell us? That means the Hubble was fucking 27,500 goddamn fucking pounds. 43 fucking feet tall. With a full fucking crew of 7 people. And it's supposed to be at 345 miles above the surface of the Earth. So if you're mathematically inclined and you crunch some of these numbers together, ask yourself, how much fuel was needed to get the 300, at least 250 miles or 300 miles? You're carrying a 27,000 pound fucking space telescope with a full crew and all of the gear you need to get up there. You factor all that in. The shuttle, you're way above 98%. There's no fucking way that shuttle could have gotten to the altitude it needed to get to launch the fucking Hubble. The Hubble is not there. I said this in several videos. The Hubble is not in fucking space. You motherfuckers who got telescopes saying, oh yeah, I seen the Hubble from fucking, on the ground. I saw it with my own eyes. You didn't see shit with your own eyes. What you saw was looking in a telescope, which is not your own motherfucking eyes. Your eyes being aided by something that gives you the fucking artificial magnification to determine what they want you to see. You didn't take your eye away from that telescope and look up at the sky and says, oh yeah, that is the Hubble telescope. You didn't see the fucking Hubble. Period. You can't prove that's what you saw. Somebody told you that's the fucking Hubble. Let's go on. Keep trying to tell you people this shit. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. You motherfuckers ain't got no fucking proofs. Here's your proof.
Reworking real rockets, notice 85 to 90% propellant for real rockets. That means 15 to 10% of everything else is the rocket. And part of that has to be the payload, which adds meaning to your mission. And so the payload that you could take in a rocket is around 2%. So 2% of everything you see on the rocket ends up being a freight that you can deliver FOB to orbit. Now, let's look at the implications to design. I mean, engineers have to design these things. And I've taken a couple classes of vehicles we're all used to. Let's look at surface vehicles. Okay, and I've taken the Queen Mary, my pickup truck, and a locomotive. And these things are all less than 10% propellant. They can have high payload capability. 60% of the mass of these things can be payload. And they're made out of billets of steel. And they're robust. Now, let's look at aviation. Airplanes. 30 to 40% propellant. Up to 40% payload capability. These are truly lightweight structures made out of aluminum, made out of epoxy graphite composite, sometimes titanium. You got to roll your engineering nickels around when you get to airplanes, and you just can't wantonly drill a hole through some part of the structure because you want to bolt on a new bracket or something like that. You got to do your engineering when you get into something that's 30 to 40% propellant. Now, look at rockets. They're not even in that category. 85% propellant, 2% payload. Rockets are on the edge of our engineering ability to even make and also pay for. And I put another category of devices. They're called explosive devices. And there's a Molotov cocktail. And so rockets are closer to explosive devices than they are any other kind of vehicle that we're used to traveling in. And if the energy involved in using a rocket gets released in any other way that it was designed, its result is similar to that of an explosive device. So now, we know where we're going, we've got our rocket built.
So, based on what he's saying is that this shit's got to be perfect. When that rocket fires off, if the calculations ain't right, it's going to perform like an explosive. Not a controlled explosive, moving in a vertical linear fashion. A Molotov cocktail type of explosive. A fucking hand grenade. Claymore fucking mine. That type of explosive. So when we think about this, you really think they'd be putting fucking people at risk? Putting them on the fucking space shuttle? And taking a 50 fucking 50 chance that this fucking thing could explode right there on the fucking launch pad? Or not even reach altitude just like every other rocket did that they've tested, and it just blows the fuck up? There ain't no people on those shuttles. And he's gonna tell you there's never been any people. He's using key words like real rockets. Why the fuck you gotta say real rocket? Is there such thing called a fake rocket? Are there fake rockets you guys been launching? Yeah, I think so. It's called fucking computer graphic generated image. But he says real rockets. I'm not gonna try to engage in a play on words and shit like that and play semantics with you people and, you know, engage in confirmation bias. Dude's got a PhD. He's pretty crafty with his words and how he uses them. But he's conveying a message. He's conveying a message to the masses. The title of this presentation that he's giving is The Tyranny of the Rocket Equation. Okay? Let's keep listening to what he says here. Remember, all that shit they sending up in the sky, 50-50 chance that fucking thing is going to get to where it needs to go to. And there's another 50-50 chance that what you're looking at ain't fucking real. I keep saying, ain't nothing fucking real.
A corollary question to the rocket equation is, what are you going to do once you get there? And gone are the days of going into space and coming back and saying, what a good boy am I. We have to go into space and we have to do something meaningful. And to do something meaningful means you got to bring payload.
Did he just say what I thought he said? Gone are the days of going into space and coming back and says, I was a good boy. What the fuck? Is he trying to insinuate that the guys who went up there and came back, Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, all these guys, the first guys that claimed to go into space, went up there, came back, stood in front of the camera and lied their asses off to say, yeah, I said what they wanted me to say, I did what they wanted me to do, okay, the lie has been propagated, leave me the fuck alone, I don't know what else you want me to do. That's basically what he's saying. And if you don't think that's what he's saying, go back to the fucking video. Let's see what he said. Let's see if we can catch it again. Let's see if we can catch the shit again.
Into space and coming back and saying, what a good boy am I. We have to go into space and we have to do something meaningful. And to do something meaningful means you got to bring payload. You got to bring something there, science equipment, whatever. You got to bring stuff with you, and that allows you to do a meaningful expedition. And so it got me thinking about the mass, because the mass of payload that you can take with a rocket is so vanishingly small. It's almost just the rocket itself because of the tyranny of the rocket equation. So I started to look at the mass that you could bring on a meaningful expedition, and I broke it into two kinds. Sophisticated mass. This is stuff like computers, life support, power generation, electronics, all this kind of stuff. And then there's mass that I call dumb mass. This stuff, air, water, propellant, cement, bricks, things that are needed by simply their bulk chemical composition or their physical properties. And then you look at a couple of different kinds of missions. You can look at exploration missions, sorties where you go someplace, come back. Or you can look at building an outpost where you cumulatively build new capability with time. And what you'll find is that it requires orders of magnitude, factors of 10 more dumb mass than sophisticated mass. So this might have some implications with the rocket equation. Now, when I was thinking about where to put the crew in this category, I wasn't quite sure which category the crew might go in. So this brings me to my final slide. The tyranny of the rocket equation. It involves the magnitude of gravity and the energy and chemical bonds which hold this tyrannical grip on our ability to even make rockets. And it's very difficult to even leave Earth, and it's particularly so to leave Earth with significant payload. If the magnitude of Earth's gravity were slightly larger, you could reach a point where we couldn't even get off the planet using rockets. So,
if the magnitude of the Earth were a little bit larger, we wouldn't be able to even get off the planet. We wouldn't be able to get off the fucking flat plane surface if the Earth was a little bit larger. Now, that brings me to my main point. The International Ellipsoid Reference System, WGS, World Geodetic System of 1984, has confirmed and verified in their own reports and research that the Earth is getting larger. It is flattening, meaning that there's more landmass being created somewhere. Who? I don't fucking know where. I know a few islands just popped up out of the fucking ocean, you know, somewhere in Japan. We don't know what other landmasses are out there. But the Earth is undergoing continual flattening, and it potentially could be bigger than what they say it is. Matter of fact, it could be the size that he's saying, that if it was a little bit larger than what NASA claim it is, which is 25,000 miles in circumference from the equator, which is fucking factually not. I did the mathematics on that. It's 10 times that fucking size. And we take what he just said, that if the Earth's mass was a little bit bigger, we wouldn't be able to get off the planet. We gotta now start thinking, wait a minute. Are these fucking launches real? Are these guys really fucking going into space? Or they're just flying like every fucking bird and airplane we've seen take off, and we've been inside to go from New York to LA or LA to New York and land safely, carrying sizable amount of mass but a light structure. But when you have 95 to 96% of your mass as a fucking propulsion, combustible propulsion propellant, then you're talking about a fucking bomb. You're talking about a flying fucking bomb. The space shuttle ain't getting in fucking space. I think that's what he's saying. But if I'm wrong, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, right? Prove to me the fucking space shuttle has really gone out there. Really fucking gone out there. Maybe it has. Which means that all those other issues I talked about with regard to superhelium, superfluid, dark matter, dark fluid, they're not getting to the Kármán line. They're getting to another level where all that shit exists. And that's why they need 95, 96% to carry these heavy fucking, 27,000, anywhere between 10 to 20,000, 30,000 pound fucking payloads up in the low Earth orbit, floating around in this non-viscosity fluid environment. Nothing's getting off the planet. And when we say off the planet, we mean way the fuck out there, beyond the exosphere. That's what he's saying. That's what I think he's saying. But I'm open to comments to what anybody else has to say to speak contrary to what I just said. You're going to have your own interpretation. You're entitled to that. I want to hear it. I hope it makes sense. I hope you got documentation to back it up, because if you don't, keep your other fucking stupid comments to yourself. Get your own fucking channel. Put up your own shit.
Question that I'd like to plant in all of you guys and gals' minds is something to do with rethinking rockets. Is there some other way to get off of Earth without using a rocket? Hence, you could...
Is there some other way to get off the Earth without using a rocket? Is there some way to get off the Earth without using a rocket? He didn't fucking just say that. He did not just say we can't fucking do it the way we've been wanting to do it. Because back in 1945, when we were conducting upper atmospheric testing with the Naval Research Laboratory and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the U.S. Army, we launched fucking a dozen rockets. None of them got beyond 73 miles, and they weren't carrying payloads. They were actually, you know, packed with all this propellant, and we just wanted to see how far we could get, and we found out we can't fucking get to the Kármán line. We can't get out there. And here you have this guy in 2013 suggesting, putting an idea in the audience's mind. Is there another way we can get off the planet? Because NASA needs some fucking help. We got the space program, but we ain't fucking ever gone to space. That's why we had to lower the fucking definition of space and altitude from 328,000 to 262,000. That's DOD standard. God damn, man.
Break the tyranny of the rocket equation, or if we're not clever enough to think of an answer, and we have to use rockets, could we minimize the tyranny simply by we don't bring our dumb mass? Thank you.
And this guy just finished off with saying, if we can't be clever enough to figure out how we can use rockets and eliminate or decrease the amount of dumb mass, that's fucking payloads, people, fuel, you name it. These motherfuckers are looking for another way to get out off the fucking planet. Because they can't do it with fucking rockets. That's what he said. That's what he fucking said, people. That's what he said. Let's hear it again. That's what he said.
Is there some other way to get off of Earth without using a rocket? Hence, you could break the tyranny of the rocket equation. Or, if we're not clever enough to think of an answer, and we have to use rockets, could we minimize the tyranny simply by we don't bring our dumb mass? Thank you.
And there you fucking have it. What he's saying is that the amount of shit, the amount of fuel you gotta have, chemical propellant, to get a rocket into fucking low Earth orbit at 8 kilometers a second, you gotta have 93 to 96% propellant just to get at a velocity of 8 kilometers a second. The rest of that shit is payload. So you got a full crew of people. You've got whatever their gear is. They're going to need water. They're going to need food. They're going to need any kind of other emergency shit just in case something goes wrong. Every single fucking pound has to be accounted for. So that 96% could go to 97%, 98%. The tyranny of the rocket equation. He basically said to me, just to me, that's what I'm interpreting, that if we're not clever enough to figure out a way to use some other means of fucking vertical transportation to get off the planet into space that doesn't require people and all this dumb mass, then we're going to stay stuck on the fucking flat plane. That's right. Because that's exactly where the fuck we've been for the last goddamn 100 years. Stuck on the fucking flat plane surface of the earth. We just can't do it. You start putting this shit together, it's unfucking predictable. The tyranny of the rocket equation. You put all that propellant on there, you put it on a launch pad, you see what happens with fucking SpaceX, with all the failed rocket launches that you can find on YouTube on videos. You actually gonna put people inside these fucking things and count down the motherfucking 10 and cross your motherfucking fingers and your legs and shit and say, oh man, I hope this fucking works, I hope this works out. Lift off, boom! Oh shit, back to the drawing board. Next crew, you got motherfuckers lined up waiting for the launch. These motherfuckers do so much training and hope their fucking number doesn't get called. Because they don't want to be strapped. They don't want to be the ones to be strapped in at a motherfucker and say, okay, I'll go. They ain't going nowhere, man. The motherfuckers are getting on a C-17, C-130 and getting their asses flown down the fucking Antarctica to the Concordia station and freeze their motherfucking asses off. Until the lights and cameras are fucking turned off and they can go into hiding and laugh their asses off and do some sort of green screen shit to say, hey, you know, yeah, being in space is fantastic. It's blacker than the blackest black. I've been wanting to be an astronaut all my life. Man, it's fucking incredible, man. This is crazy. Decide for yourself, people. I look forward to your comments. You ain't got nothing nice to say. Don't say fucking nothing at all. Put up your own fucking channel. I'm dead serious. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And there you have it. Mr. Dumbass, lying motherfucking Don Pettit just potentially admitted rockets don't work. The ISS, there ain't no fucking way it can be up there. There is no fucking way the ISS can be where it's at. No way. It can't be doing what it's doing, dropping and rising in altitude 1 to 2 to 3 miles, sometimes fucking 5, 8, 10 miles. When you drop from 245 miles where you're supposed to be to 190 miles, man. Alright? That shit's fucking crazy. That's almost 15 fucking miles, man. That's almost 15 miles of fucking ISS dropped in altitude to take a photo of the Antarctic coastline, which I put up the video on that shit. 1,100 miles away from the Antarctic coastline at 190 miles. And then all of a sudden it got back up to 245, 100 yards long, 50 yards wide. That's how big that motherfucker is. Yeah, okay. Let me see the 747 that took that fucking photo. I guarantee you it's probably Sophia. Guarantee it. Man, some of you people, look, I can't say keep waking up. You motherfuckers been taking the red pill too fucking much, man. You need to take the blue pill. Or get some fucking fresh weed or some mushrooms or some shit. Or just stop taking that shit altogether. And drink a 6-pack of motherfucking reality. I'm out. Peace out. Take care.